Wicks and Graham Hardy. You're in for an absolute treat this morning. I met them, some point last year, and was completely knocked out with the energy, the enthusiasm, and where they'd actually come from, what their journey had been to start up their business. And the bit that really impressed me at the time is they were involved with the banking crisis back, if all of you can remember it, 2008, and they were involved with the restructuring, the recovery of RBS. So I can't think of a better pair of chaps with a safe pair of hands to talk us through what we should be looking at as businesses for the journey forward. So if we could all mute, that would be really great. And if Sarah, if people join in it and they haven't muted, could you send them a little note on chat or something, or mute them yourself? Fantastic. Okay, enough from me. I'll hand over to the guys.
Great, thank you, Bree. So I'm going to just start to share my screen. This is going to be a double act between Graham and I will kick off and then hand over to Graham as we go through. So let's go. So first of all, thank you all for taking the time to join today. I think it's worthwhile starting with, as much as this is a business seminar, I just want to take a moment to sort of thank anyone and the Chamber as well, anyone that's currently been impacted by the current crisis, and also supporting and working on the front lines, because I think, you know, at this moment in time, there are bigger things that are happening around the business world, but also personally. So, okay, I'm going to kick off with what we're going to cover. So I'm going to talk very briefly about Infusion, not too much about us, then really discuss about change and what change is and what we're going through right now. I'm then going to hand over to Graham, who's going to look at the real experiences from days gone by, and what successful companies that came out of the past crisis and the actions they take. And that's going to lead directly into what we see as the kind of critical 4 steps that you need to take now. And then towards the end, we'll talk about the next move and how we could help some of you over the coming weeks as we work with the Chamber to get business back moving again. If there are any questions during this, please feel free to type questions in the box. Put your hand up so we can have a chat towards the end and Q&A. So, okay, bit of background on Graham and I. So we've spent best part of 20 years in the corporate market, ranging from financial services, investment banking, through to the latter end, working with property businesses. We both have experienced all of the early 2000 crises, ranging from the 7/7 bombings, dealing with crisis management there, all the way through to 2008, 2007, 2008, when RBS crashed. To give you a bit of an insight into that experience, I was actually at the bank the day it went down, and leading up into that crisis, there was I would say, everyone was living in a world of naivety. No one really accepted what was going on. And then when the bank crashed and the call was made for £45 billion, the reality of the economic crisis that we was going through really hit. So off the back of that, both Graham and I were working in 2 areas. One, I was in the non-core division, which was all about restructuring £250 billion worth of assets. And Graham was in what we call the GRG, which is all about helping businesses really going through recovery. What I would say from that experience was we had businesses ranging from aeroplanes through to combine harvesters, through to credit card businesses, through to big property loans in Ireland. And to give you a sense of the scale, before we'd sell an asset, it was quite funny actually, I probably shouldn't be telling you this. So before we sold an asset, we would have to go and do due diligence on what the asset was. And a team flew over to Ireland to look at what they thought was a big piece of land, right? They had a big, mega piece of land. When they arrived there to look at the piece of land, it in fact was a cliff, right? So the bank had lent money thinking that it was a big piece of land. In fact, it was a cliff edge. Right, so they couldn't do anything with it. So that just gives you a bit of an insight into kind of some of the things that were happening during that time, and also ranging from people putting up horses as collateral, right? So we had to unravel a lot of mess. And what we're going through now is there's going to be a huge amount of unraveling, huge amount of mess, which kind of leads me on to that, is we're all in a bit of a cliff edge moment and thinking, where are we going to go? What are we going to do? And there's probably lots of questions that we're all asking ourselves, from how can I access cash? And there's lots of unclear messages around that. There's probably, how can I pay my staff? There's also questions that we're asking ourselves around, do I have to let people go now? Or do I hold on to them? This is some real challenging questions. Is there going to be a need or want for my product or service? So we're all kind of hanging on this cliff edge thinking, what next? So the purpose of this, and we really want you to walk away, the purpose of this is to get clarity, right? Real clarity on what we can do now, how you can take control, what capabilities are needed, and then with that, how you can gain confidence in the future of your business, right? So this is what we want coming away from this. Some of it's going to be quite detailed, and we ummed and ahed about the level of detail we're going to go into, but in some ways, we'd rather give too much detail than some of these high level presentations. We're going to get quite detailed, but please feel free to ask questions, right? So all change. We're in the midst of this unparalleled social and economic change, right? But the one thing is, with the right planning at the right time, we can emerge stronger. Currently, I would say people are probably feeling a sense of fear, overwhelm, panic about what is the future hold for us right now. And everyone talks about this new normal. What's this new normal? But we don't know what new normal is. We can't predict what the new normal is going to be. But all we can do is prepare now and start to adapt. One thing everyone likes to have, and everyone is craving for right now, is certainty. Right? Everyone wants certainty, and no one can get certainty. That's how human nature is. We want certainty. So how do we create certainty? Well, we need to become an expert in dealing with change, because what this is one huge, unbelievable change. And in the 2008 crisis, that was unbelievable change, and you were forced to do things that you never thought you could do. And that's really what we're having to do now, is deal with change, right? And we all, and I promise you this now, we will all come through this and become far better and far greater and far more resilient at dealing with change, right? And I'm going to share this diagram here, and some of you may have seen this before, and I love this diagram because it really gets where we're at. So if you look at this diagram, it's called the Kubler-Ross cycle of change, or cycle of grief. And it's a medical study, and you can Google it, it's there. But I love it because it really talks about the phases and the journey that we're going through, both personally and professionally. So if you think about where we were 4 to 5 weeks ago, I would say pretty much everyone went into that shock surprise phase. Oh my God, how am I going to deal with this? I can't believe this is happening. I had so many great plans. Everything was great. Or this can't be right. The kids are now going to school. I've now got to change this. I've got to have work from home. Everyone is going through shock, right? Then what's happened as we've gone through, and it all depends how much news you take in and what you read and what you decide to read. Everyone has then gone through the kind of, the reality, anxiety of fear of what's going on. Does it impact me? Does it impact our friends? Does it impact family? Health, business, stress, pressure. Everyone's going through this cycle to where I think we're coming to now. And I think what's happening is you'll seesaw backwards and forwards a little bit through these emotions, right? But where we're coming through now is probably into the realization phase of, okay, it's been tough. I've kind of dealt with it. I can watch the news a bit more. I can accept what's going on. I can now be really real about things are not going to be quite the same for some time, right? And that's the realization. Anyone, and I'll be really sort of frank here, anyone thinks that business is just going to go back to normal or using the word hope at this moment. I would prefer to plan on the side of a worst case scenario and work backwards. Do not plan on hope. Plan on, it is going to be tough. I'm going to have to make some tough decisions, and anything better than that is going to be good. So the sooner we get to the realization of that, the better, right? That's the better. Because then we can start to accept what's going on. And really what we're talking about here, and what we want to cover is coming through that realization and accepting what it is we've got to do now and what action we've got to take on that road to recovery. So this for me, this diagram for me, I think is so important because you can relate it both personal and professional. So I'm going to hand over to Graham now, who's really going to talk about what we've learned from prior experiences and then really get into the 4 steps we really want you to take. Shall I stop, Graham, and hand over to you?
Yeah, let's have a go if I can try and share. Yeah, please, Danny. Okay, thanks, mate. Okay, pull this up. Okay, let's just go back. Okay, can everyone see my screen okay there?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good stuff. Okay, so morning everyone. So yeah, my part here today is going to really just start giving you a little bit more detail about, based on our experiences and what we've also learned from the past, is a little bit more around, okay, let's try and understand how companies evolve. And I don't really care whether you're a one-day startup or whether you've been in existence for the last 50 years. One of the models that Danny and I kind of worked on, it was actually during a walk in Madrid last year when we were doing some work, is around the journey that every single business goes through. And we call it the 6E model, and it will become quite clear as to the reasons why. So the model is all based around allowing a company to mature, okay, and the time to pass. Okay, so the first D when we go through it is we've all been there, don't care who you are, we've all been there. And it's all about existence, okay? And this is really the phase where it's that really exciting entrepreneurial stage where we get ourselves into a position where we've got a great idea, and then it becomes a bit hard. And you think, crikey, this is going to be a bit of a whirlwind kind of a journey that I'm about to embark on. But essentially, what are we doing during those early days? It's all about existing. Okay, it doesn't matter whether you beg, borrow, and steal, and make sure that you've got to do everything you can to keep the lights on. Okay, and quite often at this phase, you're going to be heavily dependent on the contribution of the business owner. You're going to be extremely challenged around your cash position. You've probably got over-reliance on certain people or certain customers or suppliers. But essentially, you're still in business, and it's all about trying to keep it that way. And the reason why we do that is because we want to get to the second E, which is all about making sure that we establish ourselves in our chosen market. Really, really important. It becomes a bit easier at this stage. We've probably got less concentration on certain key customers and suppliers. We've probably got a little bit more capability in our business. We might even I'll be fortunate enough to have some decent cash in the bank. Okay, so it's all great to be in an established mode, but we then got to really start saying to ourselves, right, what's next? And essentially, what we need to then do is we need to ensure that we evolve. Okay. We all know about the pitfalls of standing still in business, and it's therefore important that as you get to that established phase, you start thinking about how can we call it CANI, continuous and never-ending improvement. How do you ensure that you make a number of kind of continuous changes in your business to make you stronger, more adaptable, and more competitive in the marketplace? And quite often, the reason why you try and evolve is really to kind of go through the white water the white water ride, where really you start trying to enjoy a period of great expansion. Okay, so I always liken this when we speak to our clients around, if you picture that I'm on one side of a garden fence and someone else is there trying to catch the balls on the other side. When you get to an expansion phase, it might be fine throwing one ball over the fence and hope that you catch it. But suddenly when you go through expansion, there might be 5 or 6 balls coming across. And have you got And have you evolved your business sufficiently that all of those balls can be caught? You know, another good analogy at this stage is the classic swan. It all looks graceful from the outside, but underneath everyone's kind of paddling like crazy. Okay, and the reason why we expand, okay, is because we've got goals. Okay, we've got an end game that we want to try and reach. Okay, and this is where the journey all started. We had some great goals and we wanted to kind of do something, whether that be to make a fundamental change in the business world and leave a legacy, whether you just wanted to make loads of money and then sell it, or whether you want to kind of maybe pass it down to your offspring. There's a number of different reasons, and we remain quite concerned and surprised probably that over 50% of businesses don't have clear, tangible end games. Okay, so what's the pitfall once you've got the 5 E's? What's the final E? Well, it's sadly, it's extinction. Okay, and I'm going to put up a graphic now, which hopefully hammers home a little bit more. We can see that at every single stage of the 6E model, you're only one bad decision or one bad move away from potentially falling into that horrible extinction piece. And I'm going to just quickly touch on Blockbuster. Actually, you can see a number of names, but there's many more, as we know. Blockbuster's a great example of short-sighted thinking. Okay, they were absolutely the market, the dominators in the market. They had the leading brand position in the movie rental business. And but there were people creeping up. If people remember Love Film, okay, and you used to pay £5 or whatever it was, and then you would get your CD or your DVD in the post, and you'd look forward to watching your next movie. But the actual CEO of Blockbuster was quite a smart guy, and he actually went to the board of Blockbuster and said, look, I'm beginning to feel like the market's moving and I want to trial a subscription service. And rather unsurprisingly, I guess, back in those days, he was overruled by the board. And the reason why he was overruled in the board is because 12% of Blockbuster's revenue was actually generated through late movie returns. Okay, which is a great example of short-sighted thinking, because they were enjoying good profitability, okay, and they felt that that was the right model, because the later people returned things, the more money they made. Little did they know that Love Film came up, and obviously, as we all know, Netflix has now totally changed the landscape, as has Amazon Prime, etc. So the key message around this is we have to be making sure that even if you get towards the end game and people would say, oh, they're an amazing company, look at Thomas Cook recently and Carluccio's, etc. If you stand still, you are going to die, okay, as a business. It really is. If anybody could show me a business that has just stood still and hasn't evolved and remained successful over the long term, I'd love to see it, because I want you to treat that kind of hash diagram at the top of that of the 6E model as like a travelator, and you have to keep moving to almost stand still, if that makes sense. Okay, so moving on in terms of learning from prior experiences, as Danny mentioned, we were both in different sections of RBS, but both real prominent areas of RBS. The day that we suddenly saw our share price crash by 84%. We all thought we were going under. The shares were suspended. It was an incredible amount of panic. And it was a real once in a career opportunity to kind of experience that. And one of the areas and one of the kind of leading consultancies in the world, McKinsey's, actually undertook a study to try and understand the underlying reasons why so many companies perished during this time. But there was also a number of companies that actually really came out of it much stronger. And so what the whole concept of this study was, they had 1,000 companies that they reviewed. And actually, there was 4 overriding principles that actually made the big difference. Okay, and I'm going to quickly touch on them. So the real proactive, thriving companies, don't get me wrong, every one of these companies took a hit during the time, but it was how they responded, going back to Danny's point around the whole recovery space. So they focused on planning. They didn't just sit there and think, I hope this gets better. They focused on planning, and they enabled them to get clarity and enabled them to move faster. They focused on putting in place new management structures. They understood that it's going to be a new normal. And actually, if they just continue to operate in the way that they've always done, they could potentially get the same results. So it's really important to be agile in their thinking. Then they focused on cleaning the balance sheet and reducing debt. One of the massive issues, and we saw it when we had the delightful Sir Fred Goodwin at RBS, his whole mantra was about world domination, getting the biggest market capitalization in the world. Okay, and actually he achieved it at that point. Okay, certainly in the banking world. But the problem was it was all based on having access to credit. Because actually the amount of available tangible assets on their balance sheet was just far too light. So it meant that as soon as credit dried up, and we remember the term, the credit crunch, they couldn't service the debt, hence why they were heavier hit than anybody else, maybe with the exception of Lehman Brothers in the US. So one of the other areas that was really important on the back of this crisis was around people focusing on operational efficiency. Okay, which enable cost saving. And one of the things that we would really urge everybody on this call to do right now is really look at these 4 things and think, do you have a clear recovery plan? Okay, have you looked at the way that you're structured, and does it make sense for the new normal? Have you actually done everything you can to reduce the kind of burden that you've got on your balance sheet, so that you can really make sure you're accessing as much cash as you possibly can to service debt? And finally, have you really taken proactive steps to think about how you can become more efficient? Okay, so there's many different ways that you can, be prosperous in the business world. Inevitably you could win more business. Okay, but you could also become more profitable through, actually the way that you operate. And and the kind of culmination of these 4 key factors was actually these companies that did this the best. On average, they returned 150% total return to shareholders over the next decade. That's a pretty startling return, particularly if you invested during the downturn, as Mr. Warren Buffett likes to do. Okay, so there's a couple of kind of prior learning experiences. What I want to now do is I want to talk about the specific 4 steps, and Danny touched on them a little bit earlier, but I just want to go into them a bit more detail, and we've tried to break each one down so that you guys can take away a little bit more clarity around some of the things that you need to do in order for your recovery plan to be as strong as possible. So I'm going to touch on the clarity piece, okay, and what that really means, and some of the pitfalls about why companies don't do this so well. I'm going to talk about some of the key concepts and constructs that make a really good plan. I'm going to touch on a little bit around making sure that people really understand what we mean by capability. And I'm going to also touch on how we can really move forward with our plan with a great degree of confidence. Okay. So first of all, clarity, understanding the current state. Okay. So let's just start really thinking about what the clarity really means in the concept of planning. Well, first of all, and I'm sure this is a term that most of you will have heard, the SWOT analysis. For me, this is our internal lens. This is our internal look at ourselves. Okay, what are we really strong at? Where are we actually at a disadvantage compared to our competitors? What do we not do so well? What opportunities does the change in market environment really present for us and puts us in control? And also, what are the threats that are kind of lurking that actually, if we don't take proactive action in managing those, we could really be at a disadvantage, and that could culminate into moving it into a weakness. Okay, one of the things that you will see quite often is when people try and do a SWOT analysis, people don't do it really honestly. So you end up with a massive weighting towards what everyone's really great at. Okay, and they actually forget about some of the other areas. So you always end up with a 4-quadrant kind of SWOT analysis, but it's so heavily weighted to strengths rather than the other elements that you can end up almost taking a biased view when you start doing your plan. Then we go on to PESTLE, and maybe not everybody's heard of this. I'm sure some of you will have done. This is so important right now. If you think about the change in landscape that we're going through, in as much that, every day we're kind of having the government briefings, and the Chancellor comes out every week and unveils a brand new plan for businesses. And, it's so important, and it's so often the case that people don't look at this. before we even touch a plan, we've got to be aware of what's going on around us outside of our immediate business. And this is what I call our external lens. So, have we really reviewed the political environment right now? Are there things that are going on in the economy? Are there new kind of loans coming out and new legislation coming out that actually might make a fundamental difference to us? Okay. We've got to really make sure that we're breaking each one of these things down. You know, the social trends could really change on the back of COVID-19, as we all see, you know, and I think, Danny, you touched on that earlier. You know, the new normal, you know, this is going to be for quite some time, even if certain social distancing rules are going to be relaxed. They're still going to be there for quite some time. Okay, so what's that going to mean in terms of trends? You've got to think about that in terms of your own business and your own business model and strategy. Is there going to be any new technological innovation going on in the market that actually you need to be aware of? You know, there's absolutely no point in you spending a fortune on a brand new technology platform if actually across the market a member of your competitors is already building something far stronger and far better, and possibly even offering it at a far cheaper price, because you're going to waste an awful lot of time, money, effort, resource, etc. on building something that's simply going to be doomed to failure before you even start. Okay, then you've got to start thinking about your legislation, okay, and all the new laws that are likely to come on the back of this. Okay, make sure that there's somebody in your business that really understands how that whole landscape is looking. And then if you've got a kind of environmental balance and bias in your business, is there anything that's likely to change? You know, whether it be now or at a point in the future that could really change exactly what you're offering and what your proposition is right now. So that's your internal and your external. And then we've got the other piece, which for me is very, very important, is around market lens. You know, how are you positioning yourselves when you compare against what your competitors are doing? So, I remain dumbfounded quite often the amount of times we work with clients and we ask them to really delve deep around who their competitors are and what they're doing. And we've had a number of clients, surprisingly, that have actually said, I don't really know who my competitors are, let alone what they're up to. It is so important that before you start embarking on a detailed recovery plan, that you understand all three of these elements, because the way we kind of describe it, and when we come to look to take control, you've got to plan with your eyes wide open. Okay, you do not start, or you should not start building a plan until all these things are complete. Okay, you've got to know where you're kind of well positioned to exploit opportunity. You've got to know exactly what's going on around you and that whole kind of wider economic view. And you've got to understand what your competitors are doing. If I take a great example, and we've touched on RBS a couple of times, Danny and I ran 2 large program work streams as part of the government ownership of RBS. They were mandated to divest 2 million of their existing clients into a brand new challenger bank. And we were running 2 big work streams in that program. And it took about 7 years before actually the program was shut down, and they've had to now take a different approach. And the reason for that is because the program was doomed to failure before it even started, despite there being investment of multiple billions of pounds. And the reason for that is because instead of what you see today with your Starling banks and Tide and Metro and all the people that are trying to be nimble in the challenger bank space, the original decision around how we're going to build this challenger bank was to clone the technology of RBS and NatWest, which is a classic example of a small challenger bank doesn't need anything like the costs associated with the infrastructure of an RBS and NatWest. Okay, so it basically culminated in them already having such an expensive cost base that no matter what they did from a strategic standpoint, okay, and however well they ran the program, the business just wasn't going to be viable because the costs were too big. So it's so important that you plan before, we always used to call it a plan for a plan. You've got to be making sure that you're planning with your eyes wide open, and you can only do that by following the SWOT, the PESTLE, and the competitor analysis. So once you've got your plan, how can you ensure you can control that plan correctly? And there's a wide project management term called a RAID log. Okay, and again, I'm not going to go through this in any great detail, but essentially what we're asking is, when you've got your plan built, what are your risks? What are the inherent risks that lie within your plan? Understand what they are, and then you start working on what are the mitigants that you're going to be able to have in place to address those risks before they become issues. What assumptions have you made? You know, we were working with an ex-pro footballer yesterday who's working on building his own sports management agency. And one of the assumptions he's got in his plan that the football season's going to actually come back to life in the next, few weeks. Well, what happens if it doesn't? Okay, does that mean that, if he's an agent and he doesn't necessarily have access to a transfer window, how does that impact his revenue? Okay, I want you to think about what assumptions are you putting in your plan and how can you validate those as soon as possible. The biggest one, quite often in planning space, lots of people always focus on risks. It's the issues you've got to really focus on. They're the most important things. These are live issues that need addressing right now. So what are those issues and what are the creative solutions that you've got in place to overcome them? Okay. And then finally, this is a real favorite of mine, is around dependencies. You can't deliver a real big recovery plan on your own. So what can you do? Well, one of the things, you're going to be dependent on, whether it be suppliers, you're going to be dependent on staff, you're going to be dependent on customers, you might be dependent on banks giving you money, etc. You've got to be making sure that you get the right handshakes in place, okay? And say, I need this by this date. Do you agree? Okay. It's amazing how often what you see with plans is everyone goes off into their own little part, delivering their own piece. But if someone's delayed over here, the knock-on impact, because someone else is dependent on delivery of that, is everything else gets knocked off. We used to call it the critical path. There will be key dependencies in your plan that, if they're not delivered on time, will have an immediate knock-on impact to the rest of your plan. Really, really important that everybody makes sure that whatever plan they've got, your risks, assumptions, issues, and dependencies are really well known and are carefully managed. Now we talk about capability, okay, and ensuring you've got the capabilities to deliver the plan. So we've talked about, we've assessed the market, we've talked about having a plan, and we've got some good control around it. Who's going to deliver it? Have we got the capabilities to deliver it? So what we've got to do first of all is we've got to identify the right owners, the people that carry it. Do they have the knowledge? Do they have the skill? Do they, do we have, or do they have access to the right resources that enable them to deliver the tasks that they're being assigned? And have they got the capacity? And I could argue there's another one to go in there around, are they motivated to do it? But once you've got, and you've identified your owners, okay, that's the first part. Second part is they might not have all of the knowledge and skill. They might not have access to all the resources that they need. They might just simply not have the time to deliver what's needed in the time frame that's been set. So we call it TDO, okay? If people don't have the knowledge, skill, resources, capacity, etc., you've got an option, but don't just sit there and fester. You've either got to train somebody, you've got to delegate that task to someone totally different, okay, or you've got to outsource it. But one way or another, you need to ensure you've got the capabilities in your business to deliver those different elements. But don't just assume that it's all got to be done directly by one accountable owner. We believe in accountability because having one person really makes sure that people stand up and are held to account. When you suddenly start attributing multiple owners to the same deliverable, it then get very confusing, okay? And it then says, oh, I thought you were doing that. No, I thought you were doing that. Very important that you identify one owner and they are held to account throughout the delivery phase. Then finally, we talk about obtaining agreement. Okay, so it's great that we've identified someone and we've given them the tools to be able to do it, but do they agree? Do they agree they can achieve everything that is being asked of them in the timeframes allocated? Comes back a little bit to that whole dependency piece. Okay, look people in the eyes and make sure that they have the right support and they believe that the goals that are being set, whilst they could be ambitious, they are realistic and they are achievable. Okay, so obtaining agreement from your accountable owners is really, really important. Then we come on to gaining confidence. So now that we've reviewed the landscape, we've built our plan, we've got the owners, we've got the capabilities, we've got to move into delivery. We've got to deliver this and we've got to deliver it at pace. So what controls can we put in place? Well, first of all, we can put in place things around strong communication. Okay. One of the things that causes a big problem in planning and big programs and change projects is that the plan isn't understood by everyone. So people are left asking themselves, so what? So what? I don't understand. When you've got your plan and you've got your owners, it is a great idea to do some kind of company briefing and make sure that everybody understands what the plan is, why it's in place, why it's so important, and what the end results are going to look like. We also need to be making sure through that communication that where there are dependencies, you're constantly talking to those people where you're reliant on something to be delivered to you so you can continue with your own delivery. And it's also really important that as you start ticking off things on your plan, you celebrate success. It's incredibly motivating when you suddenly start to see a number of completes next to certain goals. Okay, it's motivational. It feels like people are getting traction. Okay, and actually it will drive a great deal on an up spike around productivity as well. Then we talk about controlling the plan through delivery. So we talked about risks and issues in the previous slide. Okay, we've got to be making sure as well that actually support can be given really quickly, as and when challenges arrive. This is not going to be an easy, straightforward kind of recovery phase. There are going to be challenges. There are going to be new legislative kind of issues coming out that you're going to have to adapt to. Okay, so how are you going to do that? Okay, you need to be setting something up that enables challenges to not fester, not wait for your next monthly meeting. You've got to have the structure in place where these things are really swiftly tackled. Then you've got to start thinking about the scope. Okay, this is a classic, and this is a really important point I want people to understand. We've seen so often in the corporate space, in far, far more complex kind of programs than I'm sure many of us are working on now. But what happens is we get this kind of concept in the planning world called scope creep. Okay, and people say, oh, we'll just add that into the plan, or we'll just add that into the plan. And before you know it, if you don't have the right change control in place, your original business case and your original benefits that you wanted to derive from your project, the end result looks like something totally different. I described it yesterday as almost like you were expecting to build a Ferrari and you've ended up with a Ford Mondeo, because of all these little intricate changes have meant that people have lost sight of the original goal. So whenever there is a change that needs to be made, you are carefully assessing it before you bring it into scope. Then you've got to be making sure as well, that you've got the right metrics in place to track and measure performance. Okay, again, I can't stress enough that when we come onto the final part of this slide, strong cadence, okay, and making sure we're progressing at the pace that's needed, you've got to have the right data available that enables you to ensure that the progress that you're tracking, okay, are the right metrics. You understand emerging challenges and emerging risks so that you can tackle them head on before they become issues. Okay, and so what's really important is when we talk about strong cadence, and I'm sure any of you that have been in the corporate world, it is so important to spend more time on delivery than just sitting in meetings all day tracking progress. And trust me, this is first-hand experience. Quite often spending day after day going into different management forums where you're having to give updates to various people, that's not getting delivery done. Okay, find a slick and efficient way of communicating. Make sure that you're not over exerting your workforce by just giving updates all the time. Make sure you've got the right framework in place. And we love huddles. We love 15-minute quick huddles in the morning. How are you getting on? Do you need any help? What have been your key successes? Move on to the next person. Okay, it's got to be really delivery focused. We don't have time, okay, to procrastinate or actually just dither. Create a structure and a cadence in your business that enables you to really drive at pace. Because going back to the slide I showed previously from McKinsey, okay, the people that do this the quickest, the people that do this the most effectively are the people that are going to recover the best. Okay, so in summary, before I hand back to Danny, we've learned the importance of being proactive and agile, okay, but we cannot skip any of these 4 steps, okay, and I'll just leave you with one final thing. A bad plan is worse than having no plan at all, okay. Make sure you've got the right things in your plan, okay, and then allow your team to deliver, okay, so that you can really come out of this kind of uncertain time a stronger and better business. Danny, back to you. You're on mute, Danny, I think.
The classic mute. Yes, I was. So I'll say,
to stop sharing.
Yeah, you stop sharing. Cheers. Sorry. Yeah. So as Graham said, we've covered quite a lot of detail. Well, actually, a huge amount of detail there that I recognise is quite a lot to absorb in 45 minutes. So what we'd like to do is really give an opportunity for anyone here on the call, or any members that are not part of the call that you may be aware of, to spend a bit of time with us, right? So we know this is uncertain, we know it's challenging, but we want to share our experience and our expertise to really help you. So if anyone is really interested, we'd love to spend half hour, 40 minutes talking you through a bit more in granular detail to get that clarity in a one-to-one session where to go next, get some real priority around the business, and also have an experienced set of eyes to just give some insights on the steps to take. Because we recognise that when you're in the midst of the storm, it's very difficult to take your head out away from it and think about what have I got to do. So we want to provide some help. Also, what we want to do as part of that is give you access to 2 of our kind of tools that we've built. One is our current state assessment tool, which within probably about 10-15 minutes, you'll have a snapshot view on the key areas of your business. And then the other bit, which is probably slightly different, is more around the business resilience checklist. And actually that checklist has to be in place throughout this process. And we hope that it doesn't happen. If there are future events, what are the things that you've got to do immediately, right, to have a preemptive strike on this? How do you mobilize things really quickly to get things into space as quick as possible? So there's 2 kind of key tools there that we want to provide you all. We only got limited availability because we're doing quite a lot of work with existing clients at the moment. But if you want to join us, I've put in a Calendly link here, and I'll also copy that, if that's all right, Bruce, copy it into the chat box here. And also we're sending out a email, the Herts Chamber are going to kindly send out an email with some feedback, but also they'll include the Calendly link there as well.